You know, when you imagine being on a massive luxury ship wrapped in like a thick, heavy fog, there's this natural tendency to feel a sense of absolute insulation.
Oh, absolutely. It feels peaceful.
Right. You're surrounded by miles of plush carpet, the steady, reassuring hum of a massive engine, the soft glow of custom chandeliers.
Yeah, it creates this profound psychological illusion.
Exactly. The fog outside seems like a protective blanket, just kind of keeping the rest of the world at bay.
You feel entirely removed from the physical realities of the environment outside those cabin walls, almost as if the ship is just floating in a void where nothing can touch you.
It feels like a sanctuary.
Ugh,
But, well, that insulation is a total lie.
the massive lie.
Because out in that blinding white nothingness, physics is still happening. Thousands of tons of momentum are still very much happening.
Yeah, and it doesn't care about the chandeliers.
Right. And today, we're going to look at what happens when that illusion shatters in the most violent way imaginable. Welcome to your custom-tailored deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
So today, we are taking your stack of historical sources, Coast Guard investigation reports, and local news archives, and we have a very specific mission. We are unpacking a forgotten, yet absolutely pivotal maritime disaster.
We are focusing our lens on the morning of June 26, 1950, out on Lake Huron. Specifically, the catastrophic collision between a notoriously luxurious American passenger steamer, the City of Cleveland III, and a solid steel Norwegian freighter called the Ravnefjell.
And as you listen, you'll see this isn't just a straightforward story about a shipwreck.
No, not at all.
This is a story about the devastating intersection of Victorian luxury architecture, a cascade of human errors, a terrifying 31-second window of physics, and a small Michigan town that suffered two completely unthinkable tragedies in a single weekend.
It's really heavy stuff.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So, to really grasp how this collision became so uniquely deadly, we first have to understand the physical environment of the ship itself.
The City of Cleveland III, right?
Exactly, or the Sea Third, as she was often called. She was not just a ferry, she was essentially a floating palace.
I mean, built in 1907 by the Detroit Shipbuilding Company, she cost a staggering $1.25 million at the time.
Which was an astronomical sum back then. The naval architect was the renowned Frank E. Kirby, and the interiors were designed by Louis O'Keel.
And looking at the sources, we're talking about a vessel outfitted with 3 miles of imported Axminster carpet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, carved mahogany staircases, vaulted ceilings with stained glass skylights, and these massive opulent dining rooms.
She was the absolute pinnacle of luxury, but she was also incredibly unlucky right out of the gate.
Yeah, before she even made her maiden voyage in 1907, she suffered a massive fire.
Right, during her final fit-out in the shipyard.
It caused $700,000 in damage before she ever carried a single passenger.
Her history is certainly framed by fire, but beyond her luck, there was a specific, inherent structural flaw in her design.
Okay.
What's fascinating here is how her Victorian-era luxury design philosophy directly conflicted with the harsh, heavy realities of mid-century industrial shipping. Well, the Sea Third was a side-wheeler, driven by massive paddle wheels on her sides. To maximize all that incredibly lucrative, luxurious cabin space for passengers, she utilized what's known as a sponson deck.
Yeah, I was looking at the original blueprints and the sources, and the dimensions are wild.
They really are.
The actual steel hull of the ship, the part that displaces water, was only about 54.2 feet wide.
Right, fairly narrow.
But the actual width of the passenger decks above it, the extreme breadth stretching all the way across those massive paddle wheel boxes, was 91 feet.
It's a huge overhang.
So you've got these wide passenger decks built on overhanging wooden and light steel supports, extending way out over the open water on both sides.
It was basically an architectural trick, a way to create incredibly spacious salons and staterooms on a relatively narrow, fast hull.
Yeah.
But structurally, it created an immense vulnerability.
It's basically like taking a narrow, solid steel canoe and building a wide, fragile wooden balcony onto the sides of it.
That's a perfect analogy.
Sure, it makes for a beautiful, spacious ride for the passengers sipping cocktails up top, but it creates this massive shear plane. It turns the entire ship into a sitting duck.
Exactly.
If another ship's solid steel bow ever pierces that overhang, there is no structural hull to stop it. There's nothing but wood, light framing, and drywall, protecting the people sleeping inside those outer staterooms.
And that architectural vulnerability is the exact mechanism of the tragedy that was about to unfold. Which brings us to the operational decisions on that specific, deeply foggy morning.
Let's set the scene. It's June 26, 1950. The Sea Third is carrying 89 passengers.
Right.
This is a private charter for the Benton Harbor Chamber of Commerce. They're a tight-knit group of civic and business leaders heading back from a weekend pleasure cruise on Lake Michigan.
Just on their way to Detroit to catch a Tigers baseball game.
And Lake Huron is just completely blanketed in a heavy, soupy advection fog.
Visibility is reduced to near zero, and up on the bridge of the C-3rd is Captain Rudolph J. Kiesling.
Okay, so what happens?
Well, the subsequent Coast Guard Marine Board of Investigation highlighted a compounding series of critical errors made during his watch.
A cascade of errors.
Exactly. First, he was operating the vessel at 16 miles per hour, which is approximately 13.9 knots.
Wait, 16 miles per hour? The Coast Guard explicitly stated that was wildly excessive for dense fog.
Very excessive.
The golden rule of maritime navigation is that you're supposed to travel at a speed that allows you to come to a complete stop within half your distance of visibility. At 16 miles per hour and zero visibility, he was basically blindfolded and sprinting.
That's exactly what he was doing. Second, the ship was navigating with a completely inoperative radar system.
Oh, man.
Yeah. The unit had been broken since September of 1949, and they had just left port without bothering to fix it.
You're kidding?
No. And third, he was sailing only 4 miles offshore. This directly violated the Lake Carriers Association's recommended track, which stated that southbound traffic should stay at least 10 miles offshore to maintain a wide separation from northbound traffic.
So he's going too fast, he's blind, and he's in the wrong lane.
Basically. And meanwhile, heading north in that exact same fog bank is the Ravnefjell. This is a 1938-built Norwegian steam freighter.
Solid steel?
Solid steel, built for hauling heavy cargo. She is moving at a much more cautious 7 knots, sounding her regulation fog signals.
And crucially, neither of these ships use their radio telephones to broadcast a safety call or communicate with each other in the blind.
That silence between the two bridges proved to be the fatal missing link. Both ships were operating in a total communication vacuum.
I have to stop and push back on Captain Kiesling's actions here.
Okay.
We're talking about a seasoned captain of a massive passenger ship carrying high-profile civic leaders. How could he just blindly barrel through a thick fog at 16 miles per hour, miles off the designated safety track with a broken radar?
It sounds absurd to us now.
Right. Was this just sheer arrogance, or was this somehow the normalized standard of the era? And honestly, why even leave port if your radar is dead? It feels like the ultimate human versus machine trust issue.
You've hit on the core psychological tension of 1950s maritime navigation. Radar existed, and the C-3 actually had a war surplus unit on board.
But it was broken.
Right, but even if it wasn't universally trusted by older mariners, nor was its maintenance strictly legally mandated the way it is today.
That's crazy.
Many captains of that era were raised entirely on auditory navigation. They were trained to listen for the whistles of other ships and judge the distance and direction by ear.
Wow.
They fundamentally trusted their own human senses more than a flickering green screen.
But relying on your ears in a dense fog bank has to be incredibly dangerous, right?
It is notoriously unreliable due to the physics of sound over water. In early summer on the Great Lakes, you often get temperature inversions.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, the water is still freezing cold, but the air above it is warm. This creates a literal acoustic ceiling. When a ship blasts its foghorn, the sound waves hit that temperature boundary, bounce down, hit the water, bounce back up, and scatter. It creates acoustic mirages. A ship that sounds like it's 3 miles away off your starboard bow might actually be half a mile away dead ahead.
So he was relying on a highly flawed 19th century navigation method while driving a massive ship at mid-20th century industrial speeds.
Exactly.
He trusted a human ear that was being actively lied to by the physics of the atmosphere.
And that reliance on an outdated operational mindset set the stage for the physical encounter.
Okay, so the stage is set. The ships are practically blind, they're speeding, they're way off course, and nobody's talking on the radio.
Right.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because once they finally realized what was happening, the collision became mathematically and mechanically unavoidable.
Captain Kiesling finally hears a whistle cutting through the fog. Based on the distorted sound, he incorrectly assumes he's overtaking a slower vessel heading in the exact same direction.
Which we know is wrong.
Completely wrong. He orders a 10-degree course change to the right, to give this phantom, slower ship a wider berth. But he makes the critical error of not reducing his speed.
And then suddenly, the thick fog breaks just enough. The Ravnefjell emerges, roughly 58 degrees off the C-3rd's port bow.
The reports say they were only 1,100 to 1,320 feet apart when they finally made visual contact.
Let's break down that terrifying math.
Okay. You have the massive sea surge moving at about 23.5 feet per second. You have the solid steel freighter moving toward them at about 12 feet per second.
Okay.
Because of their relative angles, their closing speed is roughly 35 feet per second.
Wait, let me do the math on that real quick. If they're closing the gap at 35 feet per second, and they only have, say, 1,100 feet of visibility,
Yeah.
you just divide 1,100 by 35.
Right.
That means from the absolute first second they lock eyes on each other through the fog, the bridge crew has a maximum of 31 seconds to react. That is nothing.
It's less than nothing when you're dealing with thousands of tons of steel momentum and early 20th century machinery.
God.
Captain Kiesling sees the freighter, realizes his fatal auditory mistake, and immediately orders full right rudder to try and swing his bow away from the impact.
But in that split second, he realizes the architectural flaw we discussed earlier.
The wooden balcony on the steel canoe.
Exactly. If he turns hard right, the stern of his ship, specifically that massive 91-foot wide overhanging wooden paddle box and sponson deck, is going to swing out to the left like a massive baseball bat.
Right directly into the path of the oncoming freighter's sharp steel bow.
It's just a nightmare scenario.
He recalculates in real time, reverses the order, and yells, "Full left rudder," hoping to swing his stern out of the way.
So the human brain recognized the geometry of the disaster and attempted to correct it.
Yes.
But the mechanical reality of the ship simply could not keep up.
Not even close.
This detail from the investigation is just agonizing. In 1907, steering a ship of this size wasn't some electronic fly-by-wire system.
No, it was entirely mechanical.
The helmsman testified that the C-3's mechanical steering system required 4 full, exhausting physical rotations of the massive helm wheel just to reach full right rudder.
He's physically turning gears that pull massive cables running the length of the ship.
Yeah, fighting the immense water pressure against the rudder while traveling at 16 miles per hour.
The physical exertion and the mechanical latency were simply too great. The helmsman only managed to violently crank the wheel about 1 full turn to the right before the captain reversed the order and demanded full left.
So he had to stop, reverse his momentum, and start cranking the other way.
And because of that mechanical delay, the ship's course never actually altered. They just sailed straight ahead into their fate, bracing for the impact.
At 6:08 a.m., the heavy steel stem of the Ravnefjell plows directly into the port side of the C-3.
It slices 60 feet deep into that fragile wooden sponson overhang.
Just crushing right into the passenger staterooms, and then the momentum drags the steel blade aft for another 100 feet. It instantly obliterated those luxurious cabins, crushing sleeping passengers in their beds.
The structural damage was catastrophic, exposing the exact vulnerability of the sponson design. Down below, the engine crew acted heroically. They immediately cut the electrical circuits to the damaged area to prevent severed wires from sparking a massive fire in the shattered wooden debris.
Which was a crucial life-saving decision.
Absolutely. But up on deck, the immediate aftermath was pure chaos.
Which brings us to a highly controversial decision by Captain Kiesling. He did not immediately launch his lifeboats.
No, he didn't.
Instead, the crew of the Norwegian freighter, the Ravnefjell, lowered theirs and started pulling C-3 passengers from the freezing water. People like Thomas Spooner, a passenger who had literally been thrown from his shattered stateroom directly into the icy lake and was clinging to floating wreckage.
Kiesling's stated reasoning during the inquiry was that he needed to survey his own hull's damage first.
To see if they were sinking.
Right. He wanted to determine if the main steel hull of his vessel was going to remain afloat before he started lowering dozens of panicked passengers into small, fragile wooden lifeboats in zero visibility fog.
I mean, that makes sense.
Evacuating a ship carries its own massive risks of swamping, drowning, and uncontrolled panic.
I really struggle with this, though. On one hand, you have people screaming in the icy water right next to your ship. Was this a callous disregard for their lives? Or was it a genuinely calculated cold logic to prevent a worse panic and potentially sinking your own lifeboats in the fog?
It is the ultimate crushing burden of command. In hindsight, with the C-3's steel hull remaining intact below the waterline, keeping the majority of the surviving passengers aboard the larger vessel was technically the safer move.
Sure.
But for those already in the water, relying on the foreign freighter's boats was their only salvation. And tragically, for some, salvation simply didn't arrive in time.
4 passengers, some historical sources say 5, but the local records confirm 4 from the charter group who died in the collision.
Yeah.
And we have to pause here because these weren't just random passengers. These were pillars of the Benton Harbor community.
Prominent figures.
You had Alvin Boyd, the 53-year-old police chief, who was beloved because he had literally built the town's police department from scratch. You had Merwin Stuck, a former mayor and prominent local business leader who was just taking his morning walk on the promenade deck and was thrown overboard by the sheer force of the impact.
Just incredibly sad.
And Fred Skelly, a local car dealer, whose body was tragically never recovered from the lake.
The sudden loss of these civic leaders would be a severe generational blow to any small town under normal circumstances.
Yeah.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the psychological devastation on Benton Harbor was absolute, because we have to look at the horrifying historical context of that specific weekend.
Right. This is the detail that just stops you in your tracks.
It's unbelievable.
Just 48 hours earlier, on Saturday night, June 24th, Northwest Orient Flight 2501, a massive commercial DC-4 airliner plunged into Lake Michigan.
It killed all 58 people on board.
All of them.
And that crash happened just a few miles offshore from Benton Harbor. That town had spent all of Sunday serving as the grim staging ground for a massive search and recovery operation.
Debris and tragic remnants were washing up on their local beaches. The entire community was already reeling from one of the worst aviation disasters in history up to that point.
Exactly. Police Chief Alvin Boyd was likely intimately aware of or even involved in coordinating the local response before he stepped onto that ship.
And then Monday morning, while they were still processing the trauma of the plane crash, the phone rings again.
Yeah.
They wake up to the news that their police chief, their former mayor, and other vital community leaders have been killed in a violent shipwreck on the other side of the state.
You have to try and imagine that collective suffocating trauma. To lose 58 souls to the sky right off your shores, and then lose your own civic leaders to the water 48 hours later.
It's just unthinkable.
It permanently shattered the town's confidence in commercial travel. It essentially ended the long-standing tradition of municipal charter excursions for that community. The era of the carefree, luxurious pleasure cruise was suddenly and permanently shattered by immense grief.
The scale of the tragedy forces a massive federal response. The Coast Guard Marine Board of Investigation convenes, and when they release their report, they do not hold back.
No, they were very direct.
They place the blame squarely on the excessive speed of the C-3, the blatant ignoring of the 10-mile track, the inoperative radar, and the failure of both captains to just pick up the radio telephone and talk to each other to establish a passing agreement.
The findings were a watershed moment for Great Lakes maritime law. This disaster brutally exposed the lethal gap between new, faster technology and old, stubborn operational habits.
It had to change.
It directly led to a sweeping overhaul of safety protocols. Bridge-to-bridge VHF radio contact in low-visibility situations became strictly mandatory. The maintenance of radar systems became heavily regulated and enforced, and those voluntary shipping lanes recommended by the Lake Carriers Association.
The ones Kiesling ignored.
Exactly. They eventually became legally enforced traffic separation schemes.
So what does this all mean for the Seethies herself? Well, she survives the immediate collision and eventually limps back to port in Detroit. But she is never repaired.
No, it wouldn't make sense.
The passenger trade was already dying out rapidly because of the rise of new interstate highways and commercial airlines. So fixing a shattered 1907 wooden superstructure just didn't make financial sense.
She gets towed over to Windsor, Ontario, and just sits there rotting away at the docks.
And her final years are almost poetically tragic for a ship with such a cursed history.
Oh, definitely. In 1953, she breaks loose from her moorings in a severe storm and runs aground. Finally, in 1954, she is sold for scrap, destined to be cut down and converted into a mundane crane barge.
But she doesn't even make it that far.
No.
In October 1954, while being prepped for scrap, she catches fire again. So a ship that was born in a massive, devastating shipyard fire in 1907 ultimately dies in a massive, devastating fire in 1954, before her charred remains are finally scrapped in 1956.
It is a cyclical, violent end to a deeply unlucky vessel.
The only physical piece of her that really survived was her 600-pound bronze bell. It sat forgotten in a private scrapyard for 50 years until it was finally auctioned off in 2005 for $9,100 to a firm in Cleveland,
who lovingly restored it and donated it to a maritime museum.
So a ship born in fire and ended in fire leaves only a bell and a legacy of rigorous safety laws behind.
Her story serves as a stark, enduring reminder of what happens when outdated Victorian luxury meets modern industrial speed in the blinding fog.
Yeah.
The technology of the era evolved significantly faster than the operational mindset of the humans controlling it.
Which perfectly brings us back to that seed we planted earlier, about trusting machines versus trusting human instinct, and where we find ourselves right now in maritime history.
I want you to mull this thought over. Today, the global maritime industry is on the absolute verge of deploying fully autonomous AI-navigated shipping.
Wow.
We are actively teaching machines to drive these massive steel freighters across the oceans without a crew. Back in 1950, it was Captain Kiesling's insistence on human manual override his decision to trust his fallible human ears over fixing his mechanical radar, his decision to turn the massive wheel manually based on a gut feeling that directly caused this disaster.
Yeah.
So the provocative question for our era is this. Will future generations look back at our current stubborn insistence on keeping a human in the loop on the bridge of a modern cargo ship with the exact same disbelief that we feel when we look back at a captain manually steering a wooden side-wheeler blindly through the fog?
Wow. That really completely reframes the entire debate around human error versus technological trust. We often fear the AI making a mistake, but we forget how flawed our own senses are in the whiteout.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the tragic story of the city of Cleveland III. Keep exploring, keep questioning the world around you, and remember, the next time you find yourself wrapped in a quiet, peaceful fog, that sense of insulation is just an illusion. Physics is always waiting out there in the whiteout. Until next time.